Today on the two-car garage, we're going to bolt in the motor, hopefully for the last time. Okay, so the first thing we're going to take care of here is we're going to clean up this input shaft a little bit. There's just some surface rust, and we're just going to polish it up a little bit before we actually get that installed. After we get that done, then we're going to get the throwout bearing installed here. It just clips onto the fork here. Once we've got those two parts done, then we can move over to the motor and actually get the clutch installed. Once the clutch is installed, then we can go ahead and bolt the motor up. To do some cleanup on this, I've just got some 600 grit sandpaper, and we're just going to strap this that'll help remove any imperfections on the surface, as well as give a smooth surface to ride on the pilot bearing. Next step here is we're going to go ahead and get this throwout bearing installed. So the way this works here, this will actually just clip into the fork here. And then there's a couple of little clips that will hold this in place. Because this is going to rotate just a little bit, I'm going to throw just a tiny bit of grease on these support points just to make that last a little bit longer. We don't need a lot of grease here, just a tiny amount on the contact point. We don't want to run the risk of anything ending up on the clutch surface itself. So what I'll do with just a little bit of grease on there, we'll get that on the fork. Just kind of work that a little bit back and forth. And now what we'll do is we'll take a rag and we'll just wipe off the excess, and that should take care of it. With that excess grease removed, now we can slide the throwout bearing up into place. This little clip here is just going to snap into a hole in the back of the fork, and then we take the pin here and that will slide into a hole in the end of the throwout bearing, and that's it. That's what holds that in there. We'll grab a second one, do the other side here, and there we have it. There's our throwout bearing installed, and we are ready to get going on the clutch. The clutch plate installs on the splines here, and we do need this to be able to float back and forth so we don't put any pressure on the flywheel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lubricate these splines just a little bit to allow this to move freely, as well as not seize up in the future. I'm going to use the same moly-based grease. This is, it's a brake caliper grease, but it's a high temperature grease. And we're just going to put a little bit on here. Again, I don't want to use too much and have it come flinging out, but I want to make sure there's enough to coat the splines. So I'm just going to run that all the way around here. And carefully insert my clutch plate and just run that through. Run it on backwards here as well. That just ensures that everything is coated. And now we can take, and I want to wipe off all of this excess grease. I really don't need a lot on there, just enough to coat the surface. So I'm going to go in there and pretty aggressively wipe this off so there's just a film on the surface here. We'll wipe out the splines and the clutch disc. Actually going to run my rag all the way through that. And now when I test fit this That slides nice and easily. Just a little bit of grease that's there. So we are finished at the transmission. Now we can move over to the engine and actually get the clutch installed. This is our clutch assembly here. So we've got the pressure plate. This is a used pressure plate, but it inspected out to be okay. We do have a new clutch disc here ready to go in, as well as the clutch install kit. So we've got our hardware ready to go. We've got our alignment tool ready to go. Because I don't want any of these bolts to come loose, we're going to use some high strength, the red Loctite here, to hold these bolts on so we don't have any issues with them coming loose in the future. Really, all that's left now is to get all the surfaces cleaned up, make sure there's no oil, any residue on the flywheel, the pressure plate, or the clutch disc. Then we can go ahead and get this put together. So to clean this up, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to use some brake cleaner. We'll spray down the surface. Wipe this clean. There's the pressure plate. Now we can work on the clutch disc. So we're done with the pressure plate and the disc, so we can set that aside for a moment. And now we'll get the flywheel cleaned up. So we'll just keep spraying and wiping until we've got this completely clean. Once I can wipe this with a white rag and it comes off clean, then I know I've got it good to go. The pilot bearing in here has been pre-lubed, so we don't have to put any grease or anything in there. So what we'll do is we'll just gather up our hardware, and we can go ahead and slide this together. So what we'll do is we'll lay the clutch in place. I'm going to take one bolt, set it up here, and put another bolt over here. And we'll just leave those loose. That's just to keep this from falling off. Now we can take our clutch alignment tool here. That will slide into the disc, and then we can align the disc with the pilot bearing. So now with that inserted, that's going to make sure that the disc is centered up on that. Now we can go ahead and put our hardware in for real. So again, I'm going to take some of the red high strength Loctite here. We'll apply a little bit of that to the threads of each bolt. Put on the new lock washer, and we'll get that started here. Okay, with the bolts all started here, now we can go ahead and start drawing them down. So what I'm going to do here is we're just going to thread each one down until it's touching the pressure plate here. And now we can start to draw this down slowly. We don't want to tighten any one up completely. We want to bring it down evenly. And what I'll also do is I'm going to go in a crisscross pattern here as I go through this until I get everything where I want it. So what we'll do is I'll go one full turn on each bolt. And we'll keep going around until the pressure plate's in contact with the flywheel. Make sure that my alignment tool still slides easily, and it does. Okay, so our pressure plate's now been drawn down tight to the flywheel. Now we can go ahead and snug each one up just a little bit. And just by feel here, we're going to even out this pressure. Now we can go ahead and get things torqued. According to my chart, these should all be torqued to 18 foot-pounds. I'm going to start low. I'm going to start at 10 foot-pounds, and then we'll jump to 18. And there we have it. So now it's torqued down. Everything's aligned. We are ready to install this engine. Alright, so we are ready to put this in place now. We're going to install this using just a floor jack. What we'll do is we'll have to lift this off of the cart that we're rolling it around on onto the jack. Once it's on the jack, then we can slide that back and then lift it up and into position. Up and back. Okay, I got it. And now we can slide this back into position. We'll get that lined up. Now we can start raising it up. And now we'll push it back. Alright, so we'll just start sliding this back here. I'm watching the input shaft to make sure that that gets lined up with the clutch. We're a little bit too high, so we'll drop down just a little bit. Now we can just slide this and there we are. Alright, with the motor held in place now, we're ready to go ahead and put all of our hardware in place. I do have nylock lock nuts anywhere I'm using a nut. That's just to keep things from shaking loose. We're using flat washers anywhere that it contacts either the engine case or the transmission case, just so we don't have any problems digging in there. Looking up on my chart, the torque on this is going to be 22 foot-pounds. So what we'll do is we'll get our nuts run up, we'll snug them up, and then we'll grab the torque wrench and finish torquing it into place. Now one thing I'm going to do, you'll notice here that the bolt that holds the engine in also holds in our starter. The starter has just been resting in place just because we are doing some test fitting. And one thing I want to do before I actually install it permanently here, I'm going to go ahead and remove the starter and I want to put a little bit of lubrication on the end of this nose. It just rides in a brass bushing in the end of the transmission here. So we're going to throw just a little bit of grease on there, and then we'll install the starter, and that'll be for the final time. So that's it. We now have the engine installed. And that's all that supports this engine. Just these 4 bolts hanging on the back of the transmission. Because they're so important, I wanted to make sure I took the extra time to get things correct. I have these nylock nuts, so I know it's not going to vibrate loose. And we're ready to move on to the next step. I'm going to grab our bag of hardware here. This was included with the kit, so we've got new gaskets for the pipes. These 2 gaskets are actually for the heat crossovers. So we'll look at that a little bit later. I'm not going to just put these on straight away. What we're going to do, just to help ensure that things are going to seal up for us, especially long term, I'm going to spray some copper coat on there. It's a high temp gasket sealer, perfect for exhaust situations like this. So we'll put a little bit of that on there, and then I'm going to use some anti-seize on all the studs and nuts here. But because this is for an exhaust system, I'm going to use the copper anti-seize. It's a little better for the higher temperature. So first thing we'll do is we'll just get set up here so we can actually spray these gaskets down. Alright, so our gaskets have had time to dry here. So what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and slide this onto all 4 exhaust ports here. And now I'm going to take my copper never seize here and apply some of that to each one of these exhaust studs. And now we can take and slide our exhaust together. So this is the right side pipe. That's just going to slide in here. Alright, so we'll just slide this back right over those studs like that. And we'll go ahead and tighten up this upper one. And there it is. And there we go. We've got our exhaust mounted. Alright, so we'll just get this tightened up here. Snug that up. And there we are. Alright, final step here now is just to get these crossovers blocked off. So I'll grab the gaskets that we pre-coated earlier. We'll just lay that in place here. We'll take our plate, we'll drop that down on there. And the original hardware that came with this was just a nut and bolt. I've swapped that out to an Allen head bolt just because I think it looks a little cleaner. And then we've got these flange nuts that have little teeth in them just to keep things secure. And there we have it. So our exhaust is all set to go. Well, the things you miss when the camera's not running. So we've actually had to take the motor back out. After we got things all buttoned up, we did some checking. When I put the clutch in, I had rotated the motor a little bit, and all I wanted to do was re-rotate this back to top dead center. And it turns out I couldn't rotate the motor. This has a brand new flywheel in it. The original flywheel that came with it, the teeth were worn, so we just went ahead and replaced it. Turns out that the original flywheel, even though it was set up for a 12-volt car, was a little bit smaller. The transmission that's in this, somebody had already clearanced it. It's for a 6-volt car, and you had to open up the bell housing. Turns out they only did enough for the old flywheel, not for full-size one. So we had to go back in and grind and clearance a little bit more to make sure the flywheel wasn't going to rub. Didn't take a whole lot. It was only in a few spots. But now the motor's free to rotate. We've spun it all the way around. Nothing's catching, so we're good to go. It just meant having to redo all the work that we already did. Luckily, things went pretty quickly. Took us about an hour to get the motor out, get everything clearanced, and get the motor bolted back in. But it's just more stuff that has to be taken care of. Well, I think that's going to do it for today. Didn't get a whole lot accomplished today, but we did get the motor in. We've got the clutch installed, got our exhaust installed. On the next episode, what we'll do is we'll finish buttoning up all the odds and ends on the motor. We'll get it pre-wired to hopefully be able to get it started up and make sure everything's in order. So thanks again for watching. If you haven't done so already, make sure you click subscribe and hit that notification bell. So as soon as we get the next episode out, you'll be aware. So take care. We'll see you on the next episode.